you doing? Welcome to JD's Custom Buggies. We'll be starting a YouTube channel, so this will be part of the material that you'll see on that. What you're looking at is a 250cc Yerf dog custom built for a customer. I had gotten a lot of questions on Facebook about different aspects of it and different things that we did, so I figured we'd just do a walk around on video. Might make things a little bit easier. So starting off, the customer brought us a Yerf dog that he had. It was a little ratty, and we had talked about different things that we wanted to do with it. First thing is he wanted a bigger motor, so we opted to go with a 250cc CN250 clone that you find on most Chinese buggies. It's liquid cooled. Roll cage was something else that he wanted, so we custom built him a roll cage. It's all welded. Wanted to lose the spider box front end. And he wanted 2 gas tanks. So what we'll do is we'll start from the back end to the front end, and completely covered. Starting with the motor. Like I said, it's a 250cc Honda CN250 clone, found on most Chinese buggies. There are 2 different motors, 250Ys, that they used mainly, that they look very similar, this being one of them. This is the non-high-low reverse internal motor. So to put reverse on this, like a GY6150, you would basically put a larger reverse box that's made for these. Swing arm had to be redone to mount this motor. Basically, this swing arm was robbed off of a cart that we had built 5 years ago. It was a single seat 250 built for a very tall friend of mine. So the groundwork was already there, and we were going to do something different with that buggy, and it had been sitting for 5 years, so this was the easiest way to go. What we did, though, because it was built in my garage and I didn't have quite the tools that I have now, we ended up cutting and re-welding and bending a couple things to make it look better, just because now we have access to that stuff in the shop. Anything that looked like matchsticks, we went ahead and cut it off and just cleaned it up. The rear mount, I've done a couple of these on 150s also. We found out through trial and error on other swaps that if you don't hang the back of the motor correctly, you can break the back of the case off. So came up with this mount that it's 2 pieces. It bolts around this main section here where the output shaft is, and then cradles it from underneath. So when taking it off the motor, you literally have to you got to take these bolts out. There's one underneath also, and then this bolt here goes all the way through the mount. So it's basically cradled all the way underneath, all the way up to this point here. Then it's just hung with a chain hanger, just like a lot of motors on a buggy. The exhaust pipe was fabricated here. We do a lot of custom exhaust for 150s and 250s. We find that the longer the pipe, it's better. I guess it promotes torque, if you want to put it that way. Shorter pipes tend to be torque robbers, not enough pack pressure. So the other thing that we do, the swing arm, that I've been asked about when I say lengthen the swing arm, a couple people have asked me about lengthening the swing arm. I don't lengthen it here. On a Yerf dog, it's very short. And when I say short, I mean from the point where it mounts, which is right about here. So normally, and this being one of the stock bars on the original swing arm, this would be almost right here. Two reasons why I did this. One, it's a much better ride. I know this because I've done it on my 150 Yerf dog. And what it allowed me to do was take 15-inch shocks that I replaced the 12-inch shocks with, the stock shocks. And originally when I mounted them on my Yerf, my 150, I had made brackets that bolted in to the stock mounts. Well, what that did was angle the shock almost standing vertical, and it gives it for a much harsher ride. It makes it real stiff in the back. When I lengthened it, I was able to take those same shocks and go from point A to point B, which is right about in here for a stock shock mount, and it laid right in there. So now the shock angle laid down more, and it actually worked better. It lended to be a cushier ride, if you can say that on a swing arm buggy, but the shock was actually working because it had some leverage. I typically don't move the rear shock mount back towards the axle. You want to have some leverage there. So the axle sits around here, and it gives you a couple inches before the shock mount, or after the shock mount I should say, and that gives it some leverage to work the shock. If the axle was right under the shock mount, I don't believe it would work as well. So what we did was lengthened it, cut it off here at the cross member, took 3-inch piece of thick walled 2-inch square rectangular tubing I should say, and then made an alignment guide so when I welded back the mounts, everything lined up correctly, kind of like a jig. So if you ever see a picture of my Yerf dog, maybe in a race event, or you look at this one, you can see that the swing arm, the rear wheel from the seat, is basically 3 inches farther back. The original idea I came up with, or how I came up with this, was actually from looking at a Crossfire and a Yerf dog side by side, and that Crossfire has an extra 3 inches. The rear bumper is kind of cool. I actually did it on a Harbor Freight roller 5 years ago in my garage, and I was worried that someone, this was before this exhaust pipe was put on here, but I was worried someone would hit the back of the motor, so that's where the bumper came in. The original exhaust pipe that we made, and this is how I learned about the short exhaust, was about this length right here. The other thing we did was with the exhaust mount, the rear, for the muffler mount, it's actually bolted into the chain adjuster, or the engine mount. So as you raise and lower the motor, the exhaust will go up and down with the motor. There's no flex pipe needed, no extra bolts or anything to loosen or readjust the exhaust depending on the height. So that worked out really well. The dual tanks, both tanks came off Carter Talons that I had scrapped, and I literally saved everything. So I had cut the tank mounts off these buggies and incorporated them, because the tanks were still bolted to them, incorporated it all into the frame, or into the rack I should say. So that's where that part came in, and then they already had the mounts for the tanks, so that just saved me a little bit of work there. Radiator also was robbed from the previous buggy that we had built, and same with the catch can bottle for the radiator, which was originally a soap bottle from an electric power washer I had thrown out, but it seemed to sit right in the rack perfect. So with this mount that I made over top, it really locks it in there pretty tight. But kind of a nifty use of a soap bottle. Get a lot of questions about the seats. The seats came off of a BMS 800 V-twin buggy. We actually own, we're a dealer for BMS, and we actually own an 800 V-twin. It's my wife's, and we thought it would be kind of neat to put razor seats in it. The razor seats are just very comfortable, and I like the fact that you pull a latch on them on a razor and they pop right out. So that's how I fabricated them and mounts for them, and that's how they work in our BMS. So these seats were sitting. Customer happened to come in, see the seats and the belts, and asked what I was doing with them. He basically bought them and asked me to put them in. A little fabricating had to be done underneath, of course, for the seat mounts. Nothing really bolts up perfect. You know, as far as just dropping them in a regular Yerf dog. So yeah, some fabricating would have to be done. Roll cage was bent here. pretty much it was all bent here, except for this H-bar, which I had cut off a bent cage from a Trailmaster 150 that had rolled over. But I kind of liked the whole H-bar with a little triangle thing up top there, and thought it kind of looked neat and made it look meaner. So needed a cross member up there anyway, so just kind of incorporated that into the cage. The electronics, basically all this can be bought at Home Depot. That's just an electrical box. It's got a push button start. It's got a 3-way toggle. That's the black covered one. That's the ignition. So in the middle is off and up or down is on, and then the red switch is the light switch, which we mounted 227 watt LED square lamps in. And then the rear box, where all the electronic components are, again, that's just another Home Depot box that we actually use these a lot on of our builds. It keeps everything clean and dry, and you can actually open the box, unlike the stock Buggies. You open the box and look at your electronics, everything. There's really no dirt on it whatsoever. The other trick on this was the brakes. We had used a couple of different ideas for brakes. What it came down to was using the right master, and in this case the pair of masters. There's really no room to mount a master cylinder in front of the brake pedal, so kind of left us with the original rod idea that they have with the pivot. What we ended up with was that we tried to use a fatter one off a different buggy that it just wasn't working, and running all the brakes into that one. So we took the original master cylinder and then got one that looked like it, or another ATV master cylinder, and ended up mounting them side by side, spaced them out with some washers, and then rigged it up so both pivots would, when you push the pedal, it would pivot and push both plungers. Pretty simple idea, but it was effective. The return spring, the brakes would kind of drag. You step on the brake pedal, and for one reason or another, there wasn't enough pressure that it actually pushes all the way out. So the brakes tended to drag. So we just made this little spring bracket and put a return spring on it. Front end was all fabricated here. The lower arms originated as Yerf dog arms, and we added to them so we could put the longer shocks. I don't like to mount the shocks near the ball joints. Again, you need a little leverage for a shock to work and to have some articulation, and mounting a shock from ball joint to shock mount, it doesn't sit well. I don't think it handles well. I don't think your suspension works well that way. So to get the longer shock, we put that little bend in there so it mounts in the middle there, and it actually strengthens the arm also. Top arm, of course, the Yerf dog arm wouldn't work because of the fat shock. It was hitting the shock, so we kind of came up with that and a little bit of cut welding and piecing together there and bending. We use heim joints for all the tie rod ends and ball joints. 5/8 heim joints with a high miss, so that gives you a 1/2 inch bolt for a kingpin. So that should be plenty strong. Same thing with the outer tie rod end. It is a 5/8 with high miss. All of the inners are 1/2 inch. You have plenty of adjustment with your arms for camber and whatnot. And in fact, I still have to straighten out and put some straighten out the camber on this too. Tie rods were built here. Spindles were built here. Originated as I had a couple of old struts from I don't know what buggy. Cut them for the spindle stub and the brake mount, and built the spindle body with the tab and everything, and then welded everything together. Again, should be plenty tough. The rack is the rack and pinions. I don't have a vendor that carries them, but it's the latest Rage. That's the name of the brand. You see them on eBay a lot. BW stuff. It's an 11-inch rack. I had made clevises and put them in the end of the rack because this particular rack, I was going to use the original Yerf dog rack. I'm not a big fan of those. They don't turn very well. Kind of teeth in them in this, and I've seen people try all kinds of I have one of these on my Yerf dog. This one actually came off the 5-year-old buggy I robbed everything else off of, and it had broken a. They come with Heims with 3/8 shafts, and it had snapped off inside the rack. So I had extracted it, re-drilled it, and tapped it for ½ inch, and made these clevises with a ½ inch threaded shaft. So they just screw on and lock down. It should be a little bit tougher than what it came with. The steering shaft had to be lengthened. I bought some D shaft that you find on a stock car website, you know, parts so you can fabricate your own steering shafts for stock cars, which I used to do about 15 years ago, so I was a little familiar. The D shaft from the Yerf dog looked like the same as what I used to buy, and sure enough, fit off pretty good. I had to make them slide a little smoother, I had to rub some of the chrome off of it. Sand some of the chrome off of it. Other than that, it was a perfect fit. Again, that should be a tough piece of the buggy, although the U-joints are the original Yerf dog U-joints. Tires and wheels. Front tires and wheels are, you got 10-inch steel rims, 22-inch tires mounted on them. They are Slasher, I think they're called AT201s. We sell them here. It's a great tire for the money. I think they retail between $55 and $59 a piece, which is pretty good price for a 10-inch tire. Rear tire was the U set that I had here. It's on an 8-inch rim. I want to say that's a 20-inch tire in the rear. So it's geared to pull. Well, that concludes it. If there's any other questions, you can contact me on Facebook or I guess through YouTube when this gets posted. And keep your eye out for other stuff like this. And you can always visit www.copbuggy.com. Till next time.